Welcome to LivWell Health, where your journey to a healthier, happier life begins. I'm John Veal, alongside Jordan Martinec. As medical providers and entrepreneurs, we've witnessed firsthand the shortcomings of our current healthcare system. Despite technological advancements, chronic diseases such as heart conditions, cancer, strokes, diabetes, and Alzheimer's continues to be leading causes of death, largely because our healthcare approach is more reactive than proactive.
At LivWell Health, we're on a mission to shift the narrative. Through education, motivation, and empowerment, we aim to help you regain control of your health. Join us as we navigate the complexities of the healthcare system together and explore actionable steps you can take today for a healthier tomorrow.
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Chasing Purpose. Today we're talking about nutrition. So nutrition is one of those foundational pillars that we've been discussing, and we're going to continue to discuss physical activity and stress management in future episodes. And last episode, if you didn't catch it, we discussed sleep and how important sleep is. So today, nutrition, we're going to hit the kind of highlights because we can go as detailed and talk about this for days if we wanted to. But I think the biggest thing with nutrition is that kind of more backed up wide view of what is really important, because I think research has shown us that there's a variety of different diets out there that can be successful, and everybody's a little bit different. So one of the biggest things is finding that diet that works best for you, as long as you're kind of staying in those overall guidelines.
Sure. Yeah, this is one of the most frustrating topics to dive into because I feel like there's so much data out there and there's so many opinions, because I feel like it's largely driven on subjective findings versus objective findings. So I think, like you said, the purpose of today's talk, let's just keep it objective. Let's take, there's thousands of studies out there, and you never know, again, is it an opinion based off, because again, we're just focusing on only objective findings for today. Objective findings, basically, if you look at it from, we like to look at it from a pyramid standpoint. So at the bottom of the pyramid, what is the most important thing that we can do? A lot of this too, what we'll relate to is weight loss, but honestly, weight loss just directly correlates with just overall wellness as well. So, number one thing that you got to do in order to be able to lose weight, be more healthy, is we got to get ourselves more adapt and used to basically just eating less, right? So what that means is reduced calories or restricted calories. So let's talk about just calories overall and to begin with, and what that number looks like. How many calories should we stay under? Let's dive into that, and then we'll go into what specifically makes up those calories.
For sure, yeah. So in general, we have a good problem in most developed worlds, especially America, where we have an excess amount of calories that we can consume. It's one of the first times in history where we have an overabundance of food, which can actually be a problem biologically for humans, because we're actually designed to be, very good at surviving and not having food on a consistent basis. But the business and kind of overarching societal goals was to make food abundant for people, to make it taste good, to make it affordable, and to make it last a long time. But what they didn't necessarily pay attention to was how healthy it was, or what harm could come about it. So, over the kind of industrial age, food became more and more refined, which we're going to talk about a little bit more in detail, but tends to not get us as full as quickly, and tends to be pretty high in calories, and that excessive caloric intake is very disruptive metabolically, which leads to a wide variety of issues. That can cause weight gain, which we've seen that 2/3 of Americans are overweight. 40% of those, or 40% total, are obese. And then we see the metabolic issues with that, such as insulin resistance, diabetes, which then can lead to cardiovascular disease, and that's the number one killer in the world, not just in America. So excess calories can be very detrimental. So I would say standard for an adult male, you want to eat around 1,800 to 2,000 calories a day. Now, obviously that's going to depend on your overall metabolic rate and your size. Somebody that's a male that's 5'6", that weighs 150 pounds versus 6'4", 300 pounds, this can be completely different. So that's why nutrition can be personalized to each individual. And then a female, you can, I would say around 1,200 to 1,500 is probably the average range there. But that can, of course, be adjusted just according to the person in general.
Yeah, so the 1,500, 2,000 calories, depending on the person and the makeup of that person, and we always go back to, especially in our weight loss visits, there's what's called a basal metabolic rate, right? So there's
For sure.
There's a natural amount of calories that each person burns throughout the day, just kind of going through their normal activities, and it doesn't have to necessarily include physical activities. Just my basal metabolic rate may be 1,800, John's may be 2,000, but essentially what we're getting at here is if you don't stay under whatever that metabolic rate number is, we're not going to lose weight. So, let's just say my metabolic rate's again 1,800 calories a day. It doesn't matter if I'm eating 2,000 calories of some of the healthiest foods out there. I'll be an overall healthier person, which is great. But from a weight loss perspective, I definitely won't be losing any weight. So,
For sure.
I think it's very important, knowing what that basal metabolic rate is. I think that's one really cool thing we do here at LivWell, is to get that full kind of body comp report, which gives us a lot more data outside of just basal metabolic rate, but a lot of details into things that can help guide us into further discussion we'll get to in a second on the macronutrients, and that, along with the DNA testing that we're going to implement, will really kind of help guide us on which direction we need to go in regards to diet. I hate even using the word diet because I feel like it's just so locked into one specific, puts a lot of pressure on what you're trying to do versus just being healthy and general wellness overall. So let's dive into anything else on the caloric intake, or anything else we need to add on just number of calories.
Yeah, I think we kind of hit it, but the main thing is to stress that calories are important. There's a wide variety of different techniques out there that help you naturally reduce your calories by, restrictive eating, like whether we're cutting out fats or carbs or certain food altogether, like gluten. But like you said, if the calories that you eat in a day, no matter what you're restricting, is still over your basal metabolic rate, you're still going to gain weight. So, there's a large, just abundance of studies that have proved that. So, calories are important. Now we can talk about the different techniques to make it where it's not as hard to reduce your calories. We're not saying that everybody needs to go out there and count calories super strictly every single day, because that's not sustainable. There's some people that like to do that, and kudos for them, because they're going to have very accurate information. But I think that one of the biggest things about nutrition is trying to find something that one, you enjoy. Food is fuel, but it's a large part of your lives. You're eating every day, multiple times a day. You need to enjoy what you're eating, and it needs to be sustainable. Is that food affordable? Is that food available? Can you kind of continue to reproduce this? Like you said, I don't want it necessarily to be like, hey, this is your diet you need to do for 21 days. What is your eating habits going to be for the rest of your life? Calories are very important in that, but now we need to discuss the different techniques to make it where you're not constantly having to count your calories, but just watching those big kind of food sources, and how eating those are going to, one, give you the nutrients you need, but two, give you the satiety, that feeling of fullness and satisfaction, so that you're not overeating.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned calorie counting. How good do you think you are at calorie counting? If I give you a test, if I give you some foods, you think you could hit the number?
I would like to say that I would get pretty close.
I did it one day for just this week for what I ate. I hate it. I understand why people couldn't do it every single day. It is one of the most tedious tasks. But you're right. It is. It does give a lot of information. Let me quiz you.
Okay.
Overnight oats.
It's according to what you're putting in those overnight oats. I would
Don't make
say,
it complicated.
yeah, that's a lot of ingredients going into that. I would say probably range around 400 to 600 calories.
Banana.
Banana, I'm going to say probably 80 to 100.
Amy's bowl.
Amy's bowl is anywhere from 3 to
Are you doing the math in your
450.
head?
Yeah.
You know where you're at so far?
Oh, let's see, 450, 80, 530, 730, 750,
Mixed nuts.
200.
Sheep ham meal.
Ooh, sheep pan meal.
Chicken, broccoli, sweet potatoes.
All right, you're knocking on the door about 1,400.
17.
Oh, off 300. See
Then
that?
then you get into like multiple servings, and sometimes you go more than one serving,
Yeah.
so you got to double it. So
So that's 300 right there that we
yeah,
missed.
1,700. So point being, it is very tedious, but it'll add up very quickly too.
Very quickly.
You know, things that one thing I didn't even mention is the like the creamer you put in your coffee type thing. So
Yeah.
you're talking,
Condiments.
you're bumping on 100 calories each time you do something like that. End of the day, you're at that 1,800. That you may be your basal metabolic rate. You may be already hitting it. Which again, we'll get in on another topic, which makes physical activity very important, because that's really the only way you can combat that basal metabolic, or one of the main ways you can combat that basal metabolic rate and be able to be a little bit more kind of in excess calories if you got a physical activity routine. So, all right, back on topic. Sorry about that. So let's dive into what makes up those calories. So again, the second, level up on that pyramid, we talked about the first one, first level being just overall intake, calories in general. Now, what makes up those calories? So the big three macronutrients, you got carbs, protein, and fats, right?
For sure.
So we'll dive into carbs first. So when I ask you about carbs, like what are the biggest things that kind of come to mind?
Yeah, so carbohydrates, you're obviously fruits, vegetables, grains, and then of course your more refined carbohydrates, which is your cakes, cupcakes, candies, Little Debbie's, cookies, stuff that's widely abundant.
Right.
Your starches, so like your potatoes and root vegetables.
Yeah. So what mainly we're talking about within that is sugar, right?
Yes.
So sugar basically is what's making up the large portion of what we know as carbs, right? So within, and I told John prior to starting this, you could dive into this and it get way, you spend hours diving into just the different, the different types of sugars. But again, back to the objective things, from my opinion, what makes it the simplest way to think about it is you got refined sugars and non-refined sugars. So, again, using the word processed, non-processed, basically. So, one study that I was looking at, that one, kind of easy way I think to look at it is the, green, yellow, red light system. So, yep. So you got three, look at it as three levels: green light, yellow light, red light. So green light, those are going to be mostly those sugars that can be processed very easily, or they come with something like fiber or protein that makes them able to be sustained longer throughout the day, so you don't have this kind of quick uptake in sugar or quick uptake in glucose. That's what a lot of this comes back to is what are we eating? How does it affect your body? What we're talking about here specifically is, do you get that sugar spike, right? So do you get that where you get this rush of insulin, rush of glucose, which again causes the rush of insulin, which is where we get things like insulin resistance, where we get obesity, metabolic syndrome, things like that. A lot of that comes from just these constant spikes in glucose, which largely is because of what we eat, which will be some of those red light items. So the red light items, again, you got your cookies, your cakes, those really high fructose corn syrup meals, like what's in sodas and things like that. And then the middle of the way is your sugar that's in honey, sugar that's in your yogurts and things like that. So again, sugar in and of itself, not bad. Carbohydrates, we're talking about fuel, energy for the body, but there's got to be a balance in everything. So you got the refined sugars and non-refined sugars, good sugars, bad sugars. And a lot of it, the basic way that for me to think about it is glucose and fructose, right? So fructose is what's, makes up the majority of our fruits and vegetables and things like that. However, they come with fiber, which makes us able to process and use that sugar and break it down a little bit more better than those higher fructose items like, sodas and things like that. So
high fructose corn syrup.
high fructose corn syrup, correct. And again, we can dive into just quickly how those two are processed. Regular, natural sugars initiate insulin resistance, or excuse me, not initially insulin resistance, initiate the release of insulin, which creates uptake of the sugar into the muscles, into the cells, which again gives us fuel and gives us energy. Whereas fructose is processed within the liver, and again, too much of it, a higher spike of it, basically just induces lipogenesis, which creates fatty deposits within the liver, which is where we get visceral fat and things like that.
For sure. Yeah, I agree. I mean, we've used fructose has been kind of incorporated into a lot of our meals, processed foods in particular, like you're saying, sodas, cereals, and different stuff like that. And people don't realize the repercussion of how much that can increase, the increase of adipocytes being formed, which is fat cells. And then just the sugar, a lot of times glucose, dextrose, same thing is added into those foods. Fructose is added in a lot of our processed meals these days, sodas, cereals, a lot of other different things. If you just look on the back of foods, it'll say, fructose, high fructose corn syrup. And they don't necessarily have to put that on the sugar on the nutritional facts label, but yet it's doing, very detrimental things to your health by, increasing the fat cells that your body's producing, increasing your weight. But then there's also sucrose in there, which is table sugar, which is a glucose and fructose molecule. But essentially then you get this spike of glucose, which then, fills up your glycogen stores in your muscles. So once it kind of goes and saturates everywhere it needs to, then it also will get turned into fat cells as well. And then, like you said, that insulin spike is also detrimental to all of the cascade effects that insulin has on your body. In the right amounts, very good because it produces, the energy by forcing those nutrients into cells. But excess amount, now we're having inflammation, we're having kind of quick drops of sugar, we're having potential growth and proliferation of cells, which causes, cancer. So sugar can be, inflammatory, which can cause hypertension. It can obviously increase your fat cells, which causes obesity, which is a myriad of disease process just from that. And then it can also increase the growth rate of cells, which increases your cancer risk. So you're talking about some of the number one disease, killers out there that come from that molecule of essentially gets metabolized into glucose, your fructose and your sucrose and, things that are labeled as glucose or dextrose. So those are things that you do kind of need to pay attention to when you're looking at nutritional facts labels. And like you're saying, food that is more in their whole forms are going to have more fiber. That apple, we always say this, but the apple is healthier than applesauce, which is healthier than apple juice. So the more whole form that food is in, the better your body is naturally going to digest that. And that might not mean that it digests it quicker. A lot of times it can digest it slower, and we get this nice, slow, steady energy instead of those spikes. So we got to make sure we're eating food that have a lot of fiber in it if we are eating carbohydrates, because carbohydrates are not inherently bad. They can be really good for energy. But the type of carbohydrates you eat does matter. So green light foods, like you mentioned, your fruits, your vegetables, your whole grains, and then, start some starchy vegetables in there like potatoes and sweet potatoes are not bad as long as we're not kind of, slicing them up and deep frying them and eating them as French fries and potato chips. Right. So then our next macronutrient, which is also extraordinarily important, is our protein. So protein, there's a lot of essential amino acids that our body cannot produce. Okay, so that means we need them to survive. because we touched on it on our first podcast, but protein is not only about muscle. You know, a lot of times I think in society, protein, muscle, but protein is also, you know, a building block of so many different molecules in our body, especially our enzymes, which is the either the catalyst or the actual enzymatic reaction that causes, you know, our bodies to operate. So we need protein to be able to function correctly. And I think there is a lot of different stigma out there about how much protein we need, or, you know, are we eating too little, or are we eating too much? And I think it's really hard to overeat protein unless you're just downing 5 protein shakes a day and eating meat nonstop, which sometimes bodybuilders will do, but they'll also offset that some with their training, and they have a lot of muscle to feed. But I think, you know, trying to a lot of times we're under eating it because we're eating these over processed foods that are not high in protein sources. So I think we can kind of touch on how much we need and in trying to find those food sources that are good quality protein. So I'm going to kick this over to you.
Yeah. So the general rule of thumb, which we're going to kind of go against right now, has always been the kind of 0.8 grams per kilogram. But like we're saying, I think we're vastly, you know, underdoing it by the 0.8 calculation. So, you know, being more along the lines of what 1.1, 1.2 to even 2.2 grams per kilogram, depending on the person. And it needs to be, again, there's a little bit more math that goes into it. You'll be a lot better at this calculation, but, you know, you got to figure out kind of what that lean muscle mass looks like, what the lean, what your kind of ideal body weight is. Obviously, you could over guesstimate that by somebody that's, you know, overweight. But yeah, the calculation typically being somewhere between 1.1, 1.1 to even 2.2 grams per kilogram, which should be where we're at. So you're talking about, what is that? Let's just say average, you know, 100 to 150 grams of protein, or is that?
I would say for a male, I'd say a female, you're probably looking around 70 to 90.
Yeah. So females 70 to 90 grams a day, males 100 to 150 grams, depending again on the male, the physical activity involved. So yeah, I mean, again, we're objective findings, kind of what are the basic building blocks, or what are the basic things that we need to do from a nutritional standpoint. We talked about the carbohydrates, we talked about the proteins, fats are the last one. So again, something that I feel like is understudied, or maybe doesn't have the greatest studies on which fats are, because again, not all fats are bad. Fats are what makes up cell membranes, things like that. So they're hormones, yes, formed into cholesterol, which again, helps with hormone regulation and things like that. But you got monosaturated fats, saturated fats, and polysaturated fats, and there's always transaturated fats have essentially been eliminated. But which one is better? How much do you need of each one? And basically, what makes up each of those type of fats? So, what makes up monosaturated fats, saturated fats, and polysaturated fats?
So essentially, we can kind of even zoom out a little bit on that and categorize as unsaturated and saturated.
Yeah.
Now, your mono unsaturated is going to mainly be olive and olive oil. It's probably the kind of foundational one. And then your polyunsaturated fats, you're looking at, your avocados, your nuts, your seeds, some little bit of fish in there as well. Well, actually, the omega-3s in general are polyunsaturated, which are very healthy. So fish does have a decent amount of polyunsaturated fats. And then you got your saturated fats, which are going to mainly be your animal-based products, which they do, saturated fats do have a role in overall health, but they tend to also increase, at least been correlated to increase LDLs in a lot of studies. And I think we see that anecdotally too when patients, can shift to more of a high-fat diet, or they start eating more, red meats or things that are high in saturated fats. It can increase your LDL level, which is technically your bad cholesterol that can increase cardiovascular risk. So we do have to kind of pay attention to how much saturated fats we're eating. And again, meats are created differently about how much content they have. I think, fish is going to be your overall best meat source because it does have a lot of those polyunsaturated fats like your omega-3s, which is your EPA, DHA, ALA. And then you have your, chicken, which, is a little bit lower in saturated fats, or poultry in general than red meat. And then your red meat's going to have a little bit higher amount of saturated fats. We just got to be conscientious about how much we're eating of that and at least kind of cut off the visible fat so you're just not getting a lot of gristle and some of that, bad portion of the meat itself. Overall, I think if you're eating lean meat and grilling it, you're going to be okay. One of the other big things is polyunsaturated fats can be oxidized. So if you're eating foods that have a lot of seed oil in it, that become damaged in the heat process, because polyunsaturated fats are very fragile. So a lot of our foods that you'll see, that kind of soybean oil or safflower oil or sunflower oil, and most of those seed oils are going to be damaging to your body as well. So more of that conversation: nuts, seeds, avocados, olives, super healthy. Fish is probably going to be overall the healthiest meat, followed by poultry, and red meat can be healthy as well, as long as we're not eating it in its kind of process, sausage, bacon form, ground beef. We're eating kind of just those nice cuts of steak.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if you want to, dive into it, and I think, again, there's probably not a ton of studies out there, but, I would say monosaturated fats need to be majority of the fats that you intake. Saturated fats, monounsaturated fats being the majority of what you take in, saturated fats the least, and then polyunsaturated fats make up the rest, along with DHA and EPA, which is your omega-3s and things like that.
For sure.
So if you wanted to really dive into it and look at the specifics and the type of the foods you're eating, what specific fats that you have within those foods that you're eating, monounsaturated, polyunsaturated, saturated.
That sounds good. Yeah.
Yep. So all right, we'll kind of wrap this up, put it in a nice little bow here. So we talked about, again, the two bottom levels of that pyramid, what's most important in regards to wellness, in regards to weight loss. We're talking about just calories in general, the amount of calories, the amount of food that we're intaking, and how important that is, and then what makes up those calories, what are the macronutrients in the foods that we're eating. So what is the carbohydrate, what is the carbs in what we're eating, what is the protein in what we're eating, what is the fats in what we're eating. We talked about looking at the nutritional facts on, the general recommendation is, which I would say should be even less, which is basically, less than 50 grams of added sugar in a day. And I think that's based off basically a 2,000 calorie count day. So we typically say less than 6 grams of added sugar in anything that you eat needs to be avoided. So again, even less than that. And what added sugars, again, that goes back to refined versus unrefined sugars. Added sugars are typically those processed refined sugars, usually, high in fructose, things like that, which again, another thing I wanted to hit on. So what fructose, again, talk about being processed in the liver, not releasing insulin. It also does not stimulate leptin, which is basically the hormone that makes us feel full, which is why you can go eat, one cookie, one cupcake, and you're like, man, that was delicious, I want 5 more. And you do that because you're getting that sugar spike of energy, but you're not feeling any sort of fullness or satiety from it, because it's inhibiting the release of leptin. So, less than 6 grams of added sugar per meal. Protein, we talked about 1.1, 1.2 grams per kilogram to 2.2 grams per kilogram, and then just having a balance of those fats. Yeah,
I agree. So I think satiation is something we kind of skipped over a little bit. Fiber is very satiating. Protein, very satiating. So those things, if you're having foods with a lot of protein and fiber in them, you're going to be fuller longer, which is going to make you have less overall calorie count, and those nutrients have been shown to promote good health. So if you're getting enough protein in, you're getting enough fiber. Most of the time, if you're getting enough fiber, you're getting enough carbohydrates to have that fuel. And most of the foods with a lot of fiber are going to have a lot of micronutrients. So essentially, if you're hitting your goals with protein and fiber, most of the time you're going to have a pretty healthy diet. So if you're eating enough fiber and protein, most of the time that's going to signify that you're going to have a pretty wholesome, healthy diet. So I agree. We just need to overall know what our calorie count should be, and this is where sometimes you can seek expert help like LivWell, where we can look at your basal metabolic rate and see exactly how many calories you need to be roughly hitting around, and then try to formulate a diet that kind of hits those needs, that satisfies your pleasure in eating, but also makes it sustainable and overall healthy for you. Making sure that your fats and your carbohydrates are in their healthiest forms, like we discussed. So you want your healthy carbs, you want your healthy fats, and then make sure those protein goals are being hit. And then just overall, again, just making sure this is a sustainable kind of diet for you. The sugars, I would say, the AHA is probably the American Heart Association, I think, actually kind of points more toward, there's not a true recommended amount, because in reality you don't really need any added sugar, but I would always like to cap it around 25. So you roughly, like you're saying, 6 probably per meal is probably gonna roughly equate to that. So that's where I would try to cap it. So I like you saying just kind of 6 added sugars per meal is kind of where we need to pay attention to that. So get in the habit of kind of looking at the nutritional facts label, seeing how much fiber's in there, seeing how much protein's in there, and seeing how much added sugar's in there, and looking at something and be like, hey, this is probably not the best for me. And then, you can always come talk to a dietitian, talk to us, talk to your healthcare provider, and try to figure out what's the best eating pattern for you, to give you longevity, health, and to be able to be one of those foundational points for your overall health.
Yep. So here at LivWell, for today's episode here at 210 West Broome Street, we'd love for you guys to come by and talk with us, and we can spend a lot of time diving into these different topics, and what meals may make up the best. Another thing, the DNA testing, I think, will be very insightful to finding out which foods may be better, or type of diet, which, again, hate to use that word, may be the best for you. But excited about the direction we're going here, and hope you guys are getting excited for it as well, and hope to see you guys come in and let's dive into this more.
I agree. Yep. See you next time.